a material witness on an aggravated battery.
My name is Jason Viada. I started working for the Port Angeles Police Department in June of 1994. I was still 21 years old. I grew up in Forks and I tested all over.
101.
As I was finishing college at Central so that I could get hired as a police officer. And Port Angeles was definitely my first choice, and I was fortunate enough to get hired in Port Angeles. Of course, I went to the academy and started in patrol, just like everybody did. And
Port Angeles Command also advises additional units responding, they can code down.
After a couple of years in patrol, I got assigned a special detail, a teaching DARE in the elementary and middle schools in Port Angeles. Did that for a couple of years. Went back to patrol. Stayed there until I got promoted to patrol corporal and helped supervise a patrol shift in the absence of a sergeant. Did that for a couple of years, and then I got transferred into the detective division. From detectives, I went to narcotics, and I thought that, I knew that patrol would be very different from detectives, and I thought narcotics might be similar to detectives, but it's as different again as patrol is from detectives, and narcotics is very different still. I stayed in narcotics as the supervisor of a team that covered both Clallam and Jefferson County, and then I went back to patrol again and supervised a patrol squad. And at that time my squad was called the Gold Squad, and some of the fondest memories of my career are encouraging the 11 members of my squad to always live up to the gold standard. And I was very proud to be the sergeant of Gold Squad. And from sergeant I got promoted to deputy chief, and I'm currently the deputy chief of the Port Angeles Police Department. The deputy chief is the number 2 person at the PD, reporting directly to the chief. So when I was a very young patrolman, a year or two on, I was working a quiet weekend morning shift, and we got a call that there was a guy that was causing trouble at a hotel, and he overstayed his welcome, and it was time for him to leave, but he didn't want to go. And so the hotel people asked us to get him out of the room for him. So we went up there and with the key, and we opened the place up, and it was all dark inside, and he was having a bad day. He was kind of having some sort of a mental episode. And so just as we started to go in to the hotel room, he came running out of the shadows in the darkened room. And even though the 2 cops that I was with were big guys and physically fit, the suspect had surprise, speed, and momentum, and he was also a pretty big guy. And so he wrapped these 2 cops up, and he started pushing them backwards out the hotel room door, and he was gonna push them right off the balcony and down onto the alley below. And I stepped off the train track, which means I took 1 step to the side of this guy that was pushing my fellow officers, and I gave him 1 stroke with the baton on the back of the calf as hard as I could, and that caused his leg to buckle, and it caused the other officers and me to be able to stop his momentum and take control of him before any of us ended up getting thrown over that railing up there. So I took the job as a police officer in Port Angeles because I wanted a job that would be an adventure, and I certainly found what I was looking for in Port Angeles. It's a great place to be a cop. There's a lot going on, and there's plenty to keep cops busy in this town. I mean, it's kind of a blue-collar port town. It's not a big city or anything like that, but there's plenty of police work to do. And so when I'd been on the job a handful of years, and I was working what back then was my favorite shift, this 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. swing shift. And so I would get ready to come to work in the afternoon and come into town. And on that day, it was kind of a sunny day like today, and I decided to do a real heavy-duty workout before I came to work. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to put on all of my tactical gear, including my helmet, and run hills in the woods near my house. And so I did that, and it was right about noon. Got my uniform on and put my sweaty gear into the trunk of my cop car and started heading into Port Angeles. And I heard on the radio that they had kind of an incident on the street where there was a guy that might have had a gun and he wasn't being cooperative. And so I started rolling code from my driveway into town, and we have take-home cars, and I live 12 miles east of town, so I had this 12-mile code run that brought me right downtown into Port Angeles. And so I got out of my car and threw open my trunk and put my helmet on, and it was still full of lots of cold sweat from my overdo-it workout that I had done. And I got my shotgun out, and it was before we had AR-15s, so I left my car right here at the mouth of this alleyway. And the guy was down at the other end of the alley, sitting up on that fence, and the cops were all over there on Oak Street, and they had traffic stopped, and they were kind of at a standoff with him. And so I just started making my way down this alleyway from barrier to barrier behind the phone poles and cars and whatever else, just inching closer to him with my shotgun. And I could see the other cops up there on Oak Street, and they had their weapons out, and they were trying to get this guy to cooperate. I could look right up at him, right above where that silver car with Oregon plates is, and I could see the back of him because he was sitting up on that rail, and I could see his belt line, and I could see his hands as he was moving them around, and he didn't seem like he had a weapon to me. And so I here behind the fence and the concrete wall where he was, and he was sitting right up there. And about the time I was right here, I was pretty reasonably sure that he actually didn't have a gun, as had been reported. And so I just grabbed a hold of the post and hopped up onto the wall and up onto the rail before he heard me. And the good thing about the super hard workout that I did that day was that I was all warmed up, so I could move quietly through here and hop up there real easily without him knowing it. And I just hopped over the rail, and right about the time I was up on top of that fence, he looked at me, but I was right there at a foot from him, and it kind of startled him just enough to where I was able to grab him and put him down on the sidewalk there. And Ryan and Miller came running up, and we took him into custody right there. Right towards the end of my time as a sergeant, we had an overtime detail that was downtown foot patrol, and I spent a lot of hours down here on foot patrol, walking around talking to business owners and tourists and people that were downtown. And that was one of the most rewarding details that I worked in my whole career, being out here on the street, walking around talking to people. And it really got me back to the old days of community-oriented policing, and I'm really glad I had a chance to do that. When I was in detectives, I wore nice clothes to work, but I always kept my tactical gear in the trunk because you never knew when something big was going to happen.
475. Units will be arriving on OMC.
Anyway, same thing again. I was, at my house and just coming into work, and a call went out on the radio that patrol patrol was out with a subject that had actually barricaded himself inside of a motorhome, and he was a subject that was wanted on an arrest warrant. And the attempts to convince him to peacefully surrender and come out of the motorhome hadn't gone very well. And so when I got there, I went to the incident commander, and he told me that the plan was to gas this guy out of the motorhome. And so I was the one that was supposed to do that. So I got chemical munitions ready, and I had my gas mask on, and I started putting chemical munitions into the motorhome to try to get this guy to come out and surrender. And I really filled this motorhome up with a lot of gas, and I couldn't figure out why he wasn't coming out. Well, it was a real old motorhome, and there was actually a piece of plywood that was on it for the back window, and I realized that if I just ripped that plywood off of there, I'd be able to see in, and I'd be able to see what was going on in there. And so I got up on the little ladder that's on the back of the motorhome and up onto the back bumper and ripped that plywood off, and I could see him in there. And the first thing that I noticed was that he was wearing a gas mask that was way better than the one I was wearing. And so that's why he wasn't coming out. And the second thing I noticed was that he had this short-handled spear, like a big blade, and maybe a stick that was about 3 feet long, and he was crouched down right inside the door. And so that motorhome right there isn't the same one, but that's a good example of kind of one that was like it, but the back window wasn't in exactly the same place. So anyway, he was crouched down right by the door of the motorhome, and I could see that he figured that an entry team was going to breach that door and try to come in after him, and he was probably going to take that short spear with a big blade and shove it right below the body armor of the first officer into the door.
3095.
But we thwarted that plan by not sending the entry team in and instead ripping that board off so that we could see what he was up to. So I hit him with my taser, which I fired with my left hand while I was holding onto the ladder with my right hand. And then when he was being controlled by my taser, then the entry team could just breach the door, reach in, grab him, take him out, take him into custody, and nobody got hurt.
Houston, would you like your turns on either of those?
If I had to describe the job of policing, and I was only given one word to do it with, that word would be demanding. And if I had a second word, I would add the word rewarding. This job is demanding, but it's also rewarding. And I think it's important for everybody that's thinking about going into policing to know that it's a job that demands 110% of what you have to give. But at the same time, when you go off duty and look back on what you did, you'll be able to know that you made a significant difference in maintaining our peaceful society.